All right, Trouble, say good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Nisan. To thank Jerry and Applebaum for dedicating the Shiurim this month in memory of Basia Bas Chaim and David Ben Avram. We thank Doctors Paul and Linda Weinberg for dedicating the Shiurim this month in memory of Mordechai Yoshua, Ben Peretz Moshe, Velea Miriam. Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating the Shurim and Drushos this month. And Schus of Refuah Shalema for Kathy's sister, Donna Baker Matson. Stephen Tarizin for dedicating the Shurim and Drushos this month. With gratitude to Hashem for their grandson, Bonim Tzi Hirsch Zin. Naftali Tilson, with gratitude to his chaver Benjamin Wall, and with wishes of a Chag Kosher v'Sameach to the entire shir, and Avram and Shandi Kelman for dedicating the Shurim this month, the commemoration of the yahrzeit of Avram's mother, Sarah Braina Bas Yoshua Heschel. Wonderful. So we thank all of our sponsors for their dedication. We hope all of the neshamas have an aliyah. Those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. And with that, let us begin. So we'll say a lot to do today. So Baruch Hashem, today's daf is Lamed Zayin, and we are going to. I just got hit in the head over there. We're going. I'm sorry. And we are going to pick up Emir Hashem on Lamed Vav Amud Beis. So I'll say, let's actually just look back. I know we did the last part. We ended off a little bit further down on the page, but if you just jump back for a moment, just to the two dots, just very quickly. I know it's the middle of Amud Beis there, but this way we'll go ahead and we'll get a little bit of a clearer picture of the sugya. So by the two dots, Ein Avlat Shal Kayama. So just reorient ourselves a little bit. The Mishnah was talking about a situation where same cases we were dealing with up until this time. Reuven and Shimon, right, two brothers. Reuven is married to Rachel, right? Or Rachel and Leah, we'll call it, just to keep it easy. Reuven dies. Rachel does Yibum with Shimon. Everything is fine until we discover that Rachel is pregnant. Now, this is a case where, again, at least for now, we know that the child is Reuven's. So remember, again, the issue we have over here is now they've already done Yibum. So the Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa bizman shavlad shal kayama. So if it turns out that halacha l'maisa Rachel gives birth to a healthy baby, then ultimately Shimon is obligated to go ahead and, divorce her. They can't live together anymore because it's Eshes Ach. However, the Mishnah said, if ve'in ein vlad shal kayama yikayim. See, interestingly enough, halacha l'maisa, if the baby is not viable, then they are permitted to continue to live together, because it turns out that what? Ex post facto, this was a proper yibum. Okay, so we'll say that's the case in Mishnah. Comes along Rabbi Elazar. Tana Mishnah Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yotzi beget. Rabbi Eliezer says, one second. First thing you have to do is you have to divorce her with a get. And the reason you have to divorce her with a get, Rabbi Eliezer says, is because this marriage was illegal, right? Really, it wasn't supposed to happen. So Lamaisa, here's what's interesting. When Rabbi Eliezer says you have to divorce her with a get, you have to divorce her now, conclude this marriage, and what? But what can you do? Remarry her afterwards. In other words, now that unfortunately the baby was not viable, it turns out, actually, I take that back. Let's play this out. Realize it says the marriage was begun in a state of illegality, and therefore it cannot be allowed to continue. Samarava, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Eliezer, Amr Davarachad. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer both said the same thing. Rabbi Eliezer Hada Amr, suppose Rabbi Eliezer is what we just said, namely that if you did Yibum, if Shimon did Yibum with Rachel and she's pregnant, and halacha l'maisa, even if it turns out that the baby's not viable, there is still a din of giving a get. Rabbi Meir, what did Rabbi Meir say? The sanya lo yisa adamu uberes chavero umenekes chavero. So we'll say again, we had this yesterday. Person should not go ahead and marry the wife, right? Let's say a woman is widowed, but ultimately she's pregnant from her first husband, or by the way, it doesn't have to be widowed; it could be divorced also. She's pregnant from her first husband. She's nursing her child from her first husband. So you should not marry such a woman. What's the concern, right? What's the concern? The concern is to neglect of either the infant or the pregnancy, like we spoke about yesterday. Vim nasa yotzi v'lo yachshalam zerav meir. And if you did marry her, you illegally married her, you have to divorce her, and you are never permitted to remarry. That's Rabbi Meir. Chum nechum say yotzi uchalishiagia zmano lichnos yichnos. Chum say you have to. Now we'll discuss what yotzi means in just a moment. But yotzi means you have to essentially dissolve the marriage. But halacha for the duration of what? For the duration of the pregnancy or the nursing. But then you're allowed to remarry her. So we'll say this is very interesting. So Rabbi Meir holds that halacha l'maisa, since you illegally entered into this marriage, you're obligated to dissolve it, and you're not permitted, and that's it. You're not permitted to resume it. This is like a knas. Chacham say no. There's a very specific reason you're not supposed to marry a nursing woman, right? Because again, we're concerned she's going to become pregnant, diminish her milk supply, and put her infant at risk. We're concerned ultimately, again, same thing about the pregnancy. A pregnant woman who's pregnant from another man, we're concerned that the pregnancy is going to be neglected. So in those cases, Rabbi Meir says, if you illegally marry this woman, you're obligated to divorce her, you can never remarry her. Chachamim say, we agree, you have to divorce her, or at least you have to separate. We'll see which one. But halacha l'maisa, after the window of illegality closes, there's no reason you can't be married to this woman. So the Gemara wants to suggest that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer say the same thing, right? What does Rabbi Eliezer and our Rabbi Eliezer just commented? What did he say? In the case where Shimon illegally married his Yevama, again, it was a mistake, it wasn't intentional, but l'maisa, she's pregnant. So Rabbi Eliezer says, you have to divorce her. You have to give her a get. This is an illegal relationship. It must be dissolved. Rabbi Meir says over here, you marry a woman within the 24 months of nursing or pregnant, ultimately, again, you have to divorce her. So the Gemara wants to suggest, or Rabbi wanted to suggest, that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer are saying the same thing. To which the Gemara says, not necessarily. Amali Abaye, this is really what we're up to. Amali Abaye, Mimai, how do you know they're saying the same thing? Dilalohi. You may not be able to align these two, and I'll tell you why. And Rabbi Eliezer is referring to an Isser Daraisa. Rabbi Eliezer is saying, you married your brother's wife, and because she's pregnant, there was no real heter of Yibum. There was no real heter of Yibum. So really, okay, so now we'll say, remember, it turns out that what? That the Vlad wasn't viable. So it turns out that halacha l'maisa, did you do anything illegal? Right? Did Shimon do anything illegal when he did Yibum with Rachel? No. But you're really skirting very close to illegality over here. So that says, we don't want people engaging in this type of behavior, and we don't want people playing it so dangerously close to an Isser Da'araisa. That's Rabbi Eliezer will say you have to give a get. Aval Hasam D'Rabbanan. I will say in this case over here, of meinekes chavero, meuberes chavero, right? A woman who's nursing a child from another marriage, a woman who's pregnant from her previous marriage. This is a din d'Rabbanan. So it's quite possible that even Rabbi Eliezer would agree that if you illegally married one of these women, true, you should separate for their prohibited window, but then you're permitted to remain married to her afterwards. The Gemara says, fine. Inami. Other possibilities. At Kalo Kamer Rabbi Meir Hasam Elamishum D'Rabbanan V'Chachamim Asu Chizuk L'Divrei Yoser Mishal Torah. Furthermore, it's possible even Rabbi Meir was only so machmir by the case of Meinekes Chavero, Meuberes Chavero, dafka because there are cases of D'Rabbanans. And I will say sometimes we see this concept that the Rabbanim had to be more machmir with their own laws than with biblical law in order to ensure true compliance. The Gemara says, midaraisa mifrash parshimine. But with the daraisa, we're not concerned that people are going to tread lightly on a daraisa. Amarava. So I'll say, so therefore the two shitas do not align. But what does come out is something very interesting. So we have Rabbi Eliezer commenting in our Mishnah, kind of disagreeing with our Mishnah. Because remember again, what did our Mishnah say? Let's go back. Reuven dies, leaves behind the widow Rachel. It's right, Shimon does Yibum. Everybody thinks they're just doing the right thing. Then it turns out that's what? Rachel's pregnant. Okay, Rachel delivers or she miscarries, non-viable baby. So we'll say, so what's the status of Shimon and Leah's marriage? According to the Mishnah, what's the status of their marriage? Right, Yibum. It's fine. Rabbi Eliezer came along and said, no. You got to give her a get. Why? Because a marriage that was started in a state of illegality has to be dissolved. That's Rabbi Eliezer's shita. If the relationship started in an illegal state, it must be dissolved with a get. We tried to align that with Rabbi Meir by menekes chavero, meubaras chavero. Turns out they're not really aligned. So let's go back. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, uledivrei chachamim yotzia beget. So we'll say, now focusing on the case of menekes chavero, meubaras chavero. Remember again, what did the chachamim say? Let's jump. So again, so Shimon, well, we just use the same names, but not Yibum. Shimon marries Rachel because her husband Reuben passed away. They're not brothers in this case. But it turns out that Nebuch, Rachel was widowed with a young baby. So now she's nursing. What did Chazal say about a woman who's nursing, remarrying her? What did they say? Not within 24 months. Gotta wait. Shimon illegally marries her. Right? Remember again, so what did the Rabbanan say? The Rabbanan say, Yotzia, he has to literally have to dissolve the marriage or remove the marriage, but he could remarry her after the 24 months elapse. Comes along Rav, and Rav says, by the way, Divrei Chachamim, Yotzia beget. When the Chacham say you have to dissolve the marriage, it means you have to divorce her. You could remarry her afterwards, but Lamaisa, right now you have to divorce her. Mar Zutra says, Dekanami diktani, Yotzi v'lo katani yafrish. So I will say, Mar Zutra says, I'll tell you why this is true. The diuk is very strong. The Gemara used lashon of Yotzi and not yafrish. Yafrish means what? Separate. Yotzi means remove. And Yotzi always means a get. So I will say, this is incredibly important. So even according to the Chachamim who say that no, you could remain married to this woman, you just can't remain married to her during the window of illegality, hold that during that window, you must actively dissolve the marriage. So again, Shimon has to give Rachel a get when she finishes nursing. Ultimately, he's permitted to remarry her, but Lamais, again, he's got to give her a get. Incredible. Amarli Ravashi Ravoshia Braid Rav Idi. Hasam Tanan, there we learn, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Kol Sheshaha Ba'adam Lamid Yom. So again, I just want to point out. Well, okay, let's go back there because we have a lot of fascinating concepts floating around over here. Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah, Rabbi Meir Chachamim in the case of Meinekes Uberes Chavero. Amrli Ravashi Ravoshia Braid Rav Idi. Hasam Tanan. There we learn Shmuel Omer. Kol Shesha Ba'adam Lamid Yom Eno Nefel. So I'll say there's actually an interesting discussion. So we have a general concept that halacha l'maisa, look at Rashi. Kol sheshash shloshim yom, it's in the third wide line of Rashi. Mishnolad chai shloshim yom. A baby, once it's born, if it survives for 30 days, it's considered to be viable. So I'll say, meaning that if a baby chas v'shalom passes away within 30 days, that was considered to be mitchila, a non-viable baby. Once you pass the 30-day mark, ultimately that represents viability. Halosha sveikahavi. And I will say, now interestingly enough, if it did not, let's say the baby passed away within 30 days, it's a suffix. In other words, we can't say definitively it's not a viable baby, but ultimately, again, it's a suffix viability. And I will say, I want to point out over here, what's the nafkamina? In other words, the baby was born alive. So what's nafkamina if it passes away within 30 days, after 30 days? So first of all, again, remember, for Yibum, what we've seen is like this. In order for the widow not to have to do Yibum, it's not just enough for her to have a child. She has to have what? A Vlad Shal Kayama, a viable child. So this is incredibly important. So now the Gemara is suggesting over here, this is not just the din of if the baby is born and when the baby is born, the baby is healthy. It seems to be over here, Shmuel says that viability is determined by the ability to make it past the first 30 days of life. That determines viability. I think I also mentioned a few days ago, there is also a nafkamina for sitting Shiva. Ultimately, for mourning practices. Is there an obligation of mourning practices for a child that dies within 30 days? According to most opinions, the answer to that is no, because dying within 30 days represents a lack of viability. Okay, but we're going to focus on the Yibum. So the Gemara says, Halosha Savekahavi V'itmar. Here we learned Meis besoch lamed yom va'amda v'niskatsha. Listen to this, Rabbi. But yet we also learned as follows, that if a woman has a child, and what? The baby died within 30 days. Va'amad v'niskatsha. And ultimately, again, she got up and she accepted Kiddushin. Rabbi said, just to frame the case over here, because it's actually a fascinating case. So Rashi says, Meis besoch shloshim ben ha'yivama v'niskatsha l'shuk bechazaka sheptur min shumana. Listen to this. So Rabbi says, so now, same case as we had before. Reuven and Shimon brothers. Reuven passes away. Rachel leaves behind Rachel. In this case, Rachel, the widow, knows that she's pregnant at the time of her husband's death. No yibum. Of course, no yibum. She gives birth to a baby. What happens? The baby passes away within 30 days, but Rachel goes and gets married. Right? Not to Shimon. Rachel accepts Kiddushin from someone in the shuk, right? From someone in the shuk, from a regular guy. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Ravina mishmei de Rava Amar im eishes Yisrael hi choletzes, vim eishes Kohen hi eino choletzes. So listen to this. So the Gemara suggests as follows. So Rava says, look, we'll say, now we have an interesting case here. Why? Because the baby passed away within 30 days, wasn't viable. So really she's subject to what? Yibum. So listen to this. So the Gemara says, if she's married to a Yisrael, no problem. Just let her do chalitza with Shimon, and then she could carry on with the rest of her life. Look at Rashi. Emeishes Yisrael imzeh shekidshei Yisrael shimtach lot mina yavam la'achar kiddushin lote asra balas choletzes. Suppose I listen to this. So if she married, right? If Rachel married a Yisrael, a regular guy, no problem. Just let her do chalitza with Shimon. And I will say now she's a chalutza, but does that impact her present marriage? No, because halacha l'maaseh Yisrael can marry a chalutza. V'me'eshes Kohen he, if she is the wife of a Kohen. So I will say here's the problem: if she's the wife of a Kohen, and now we were to make her do chalitza with Shimon, she would effectively be prohibited to her second husband. V'me'eshes Kohen he eino choletzes. So if she's the wife of a Kohen, she doesn't do chalitza. To which the Gemara says, achaz zu v'achaz zu choletzes. And ultimately, again, Rabbi Mishar of Rava said, no, both of these women have to do chalitza. In other words, Rabbi say, Rabbi Mishar says, this is not like an optional chalitza. She has to do chalitza. Amar le Ravina le Rabbi Mishar. So Ravina said to Rabbi Mishar as follows: Ba'arta Amar Rava Hari. At night, Rava said this position, right? Ultimately, again, with Safra, Hadarbe. But in the morning, he retracted it. So in other words, so he said to Rabbi Mishar, at night, Rava said that Allah Chalamaysa, both women have to do chalitza. But in the morning, he changed his mind to go back and say, no. If she's married to a Yisrael, she does chalitza. But if she's married to a Kohen, she doesn't need to do chalitza. So now listen to this. So Amarle, Sharis, Safra, Hadarbe, Amarle, Sharisu. Are you telling me that Rava allowed this woman, if she's married to a Kohen, to continue without chalitza? So Yehi Rava ditishtaru af tarba. So it should be, right, if you do that, literally it means I make a shvua that you're going to come to permit forbidden fats, right? Chaylev. Otherwise, what he was saying, in other words, it's an expression of saying, there's no way, you're crazy, right? You're crazy. There's no way that Rava would allow this woman, even if she's married to a Kohen, not to do chalitza. It turns out she had a non-viable child. So Lemais, again, of course she's subject to chalitza. To which the Gemara says, Yerava de Tashtara Aftar Bahachanami, Mi'uberes Chavero, Umenekes Chavero, Hanasua the Kohen, Mai. So here's what's happening over here. This is actually just quite fascinating. So first of all, what you have over here is like this. Here Rabbi Shmuel is saying that halacha l'maisa, if the baby passes away after 30 days, it shows viability. Within 30 days, Rabbi say it's just a suffix viability. But remember, again, when you have a case of the Yevama, Rachel, who gives birth, had the baby pass away within 30 days, and then gets married, even if you want to say it's a suffix, right? It's a suffix da'oraisa about whether or not she's subject to yibum. The only way to deal with the suffix da'oraisa is how? Chalitza. Now again, to which the Gemara is saying, and it has to be no matter who she's married to, whether she's married to a Kohen or to a Yisrael, she's going to have to do that chalitza. Now, there's ramifications. If she's married to a Yisrael and she does chalitza, the good news is what? The good news is what? Her marriage is unimpacted. Unfortunately, if she married a Kohen and now she has to do chalitza, her marriage will be impacted. But it's impossible for her not to do that chalitza because we're still at least dealing with what? A suffix d'oraisa that she is chayeves in yibum. Incredible. So says the Gemara, listen to this. What about hachanami, hacha gabi meuberes chaveru umenekes chaver hanasua lekoin mai. You're about to say, what about the following case? What about alocha lemaisa? Let's say again, you have amenekes chaveru muberes chaveru. So we'll say, here's the case. Right? Reuven passes away, leaves behind a widow, Rachel. Let's just keep it. Rachel is widowed with a young child, a 1-year-old child, and she's nursing. Shimon marries her. Legal or illegal? Right? Illegal. Not allowed to do that. But let's say now Shimon's a Kohen. So I will say, here's the shaila. If we go ahead and we tell Shimon that he has to divorce Rachel, but don't worry, you can remarry her. Does that work? No. Why? He's a Kohen. So the shaila is, do we help him out? Right? Does halacha essentially give him some type of eitzah? Or do we say, no, you're stuck? So the Gemara said, Mi avad rabbanan takantel a Kohen. Although, ultimately, again, do we help? Not look at Rashi. Mi avad rabbanan takantel a Kohen. The afagav l'Yisrael ba'inin yotzi beget ad she'yagiz mano. Hasam hulech she'yagiz mano mai matzi ladura. Aval hacha di megarish lo matzi mahadir lo. Tiski ba'frashval. And I will say, how would you help him out? Right? Help a Kohanic brother out. How do you help him out? Right? Ultimately, again, just tell them to separate. In other words, we could accomplish what we need to accomplish without the get. How do you do that? Tell them, listen, you have to separate. So do we say that? In other words, we'll say, we just got finished. Let's go. I know we're jumping back and forth a little bit between sugyas. But remember again, what did we just say before? We just said before that halacha l'maisa, if you illegally marry a woman who's nursing another man's child, that sounds much more illicit than it actually is, right? In other words, that simple case, she's widowed with a baby. Or she's widowed and she's pregnant. So you're not allowed to marry a woman who's pregnant from another man. Again, it's a din d'Rabbanan. We're afraid about neglect of the pregnancy. You're not allowed to marry a woman who's nursing another man's child up till the baby's 2 years old. Again, afraid of neglect of the infant. That's what we're afraid about over here. And if you did so, we said on Amud Beis that what? You have to divorce her. The good news is you have to divorce her now, but what? You can remarry her later. That's fine if you're a Yisrael. What happens if the man who illegally married her is a Kohen? Do we say you still have to divorce her? In which case, again, the marriage is effectively over. Or do we say that no, separate, and as long as you separate for the duration of the pregnancy, duration of nursing, afterwards, halacha l'maisa, you could resume a normal married life. To which the Gemara says, Amrlei, Hachi hashta bishlama hasam kevan dikraban de pligale Rabbi Shimon Gamliel de Amri afa gav de lo shav vlad ma'al Yahavi gabi eshes kohen kevan de lo efshar avdinan kidraban. I both say, now why is this being brought up over here? This is being brought up over here because I both say in the previous case of Yibum, right? Remember again, I both say the previous case. Reuven passes away, leaves behind the widow Rachel. Rachel's pregnant, right? Rachel goes ahead and gives birth. Baby passes away within 30 days. Rachel goes ahead and she marries a Kohen afterwards, right? What's the halacha? So we'll say, at least according to the Rabbanan, what do we say by an Eshes Kohen? By an Eshes Kohen, we say that she doesn't have to do chalitza, at least according to one opinion, right? Why not? Now we'll say, what's the logic of saying that if she married a Kohen, she doesn't have to do chalitza, right? Because if we make her do chalitza, what's going to happen? She's asura to her husband. But isn't there a suffix yibum, right? And a suffix d'oraisa. Remember again, I will say, the Rabbanan effectively hold that a baby is considered to be viable as soon as what? It's born alive. In other words, they don't subscribe to the 30-day threshold. They hold viability is determined at birth. If the baby is born alive, that's a viable baby. It's Rav Shimon Gamliel who said that halacha l'maisa, you need the 30-day threshold. So therefore, when she went ahead and she married a Kohen after the death of her baby within 30 days, so if it's Yisrael, we'll just make her do chalitza, because why not? Why not? It doesn't impact the marriage. But if she's married to a Kohen, we're going to be mekel, we're going to be lenient, and ultimately, again, subscribe to the opinion of the Rabbanon, that you don't need a 30-day threshold to establish viability in order to allow her to remain married to her husband. But we could do that there because there is a tzad lahakel. There is an ability to mekel, there's an ability to be lenient because there's an opinion that says you don't need 30 days to establish viability. Viability is established at birth. However, aval halcha, but in the case of where a Kohen illegally marries, menekes chavero meuberes chavero, keman navid, who are we supposed to paskin like? Ik Rabbi Meir, if like Rabbi Meir, ha'amar yotzi v'lo yachzir olamis. Rabbi Meir says, halacha l'maisa, you have to go ahead and divorce, you can never remarry, like we saw in Amud Beis. V'ik Rabbanon, Ari beget. And according to the Rabbanon, ultimately, again, she requires to get. Therefore, both say, halacha l'maisa, it turns out that in this case, when you marry, and in fact, this is how the Rambam paskins, when a person marries menekes umuberes chavero, if you illegally marry a woman who is nursing, or you illegally marry a woman who is pregnant with another man's child, halacha l'maisa, that's an illegal marriage, and if you do so, Chazal force you to give her a get. If you are a Yisrael, you could remarry her after the permitted period of time, but if you're a Kohen, unfortunately, you're stuck. And Chazal have no eitzah for you, right? There's no way to circumvent that. Separating by itself is not going to be enough. Incredible. Se'itmar, kitsha v'so shlosha, ubarach. So listen to this interesting case. What happens if halacha l'maisa, the guy goes ahead, now both say, switching gears again. So we've got a lot going on. So far again, let's go with what we know. What we know is that halacha l'maisa, there's a din meuberes chavero, menekes chavero. Can't go ahead and marry a woman who's pregnant with another man's child. Can't marry a woman who is nursing another man's child. If you do so, what's the halacha? Divorce. If you're Yisrael, could remarry her. If you're not a Yisrael, if you're a Kohen, ultimately can't remarry her. The other case we're in the middle of dealing with is a case ultimately, again, where halacha l'maisa, Rachel, right, widowed from Ruvain, right? And then ultimately, again, gives birth, baby dies within 30 days, she marries. What's the halacha? That's a machlokes. First opinion says that halacha l'maisa, if she's married to a Yisrael, do chalitza, continue on with the marriage. If she's married to a Kohen, don't have to do chalitza. What is that based on, that if she's married to a Kohen, doesn't have to do chalitza? What is that based on? That's based on the position of the Rabbanon who hold that viability is established at birth and does not require a 30-day threshold. Therefore, when Rachel gives birth to a living baby, that's it. She's done, right? She's not subject to Yibum. Whatever happens afterwards is irrelevant for this particular discussion. But there seems to be a pushback on that halacha l'maisa, according to Rava at least, she has to do chalitza no matter what, knowing that chalitza with a Kohen ultimately will go ahead and preclude her from continuing to live with this husband. Okay, well, let's get a little bit weiter, and then I'll show you some halacha l'maisa on this. Yeah, by menekes chavero. Okay, fine, let's get a little bit weiter. Itmar, kitsha v'so shlosha ubarach. Both say, now switching gears again. Let me close out that, right? Switching gears again. In general, whenever a woman is widowed or divorced, what's the halacha? She cannot remarry immediately. She has to wait 3 months. Called havchana. Havchana, to be mavchin, literally to discern. Is she pregnant? Is she pregnant from the first marriage or not? So listen to this. Let's say a guy, listen to this case. A guy, he did kiddushin with a woman, right? Right? Who's within 3 months after being widowed or divorced, and then he ran away. It happens, right? So he ran away. So we'll say, so now listen to this. Now he's gone for 3 months. Baruch. So the Gemara says, Baruch, pligi baravacha v'rafram. So we'll say, what's the shaila? Do we require a get in a situation of where the husband was not physically present? In other words, effectively, we're going to see is she pregnant or not from the previous marriage. And again, there's no concern about anything else because Lamaisa, he's out of the picture, right? He's gone. Do we still require a get even though he's not physically present? Ultimately, one says we excommunicate him. Now, we'll say, mishamtinale means we put pressure on him to give a get, right? It's got to give a get, right? V'chad amar iruke mestaya. Owen says, no, he ran away. And the fact that he ran away, Rashi says, lo bai lemachbe delichtov get, te gale daite, de lo bai lichnos adzmano. Essentially, I will say, the fact that he ran away, by the way, and ran away sounds very dramatic, right? It's not the pshat that, he packed a little bag and he ran. In other words, that he left town and he's not going to be back until after 3 months. So the second opinion says, listen, the fact that he left town indicates he has no intention of living with her during these 3 months. I don't know, he wanted all, she's a wonderful woman, he didn't want someone else to be Mekadesh her, so he gave her Kiddushin now, then he left town for 3 months. That's enough. So also I see the Shaila, do we force him to give a get? Or do we say, look, he knows he's not allowed to live with her, he gave her Kiddushin, he left town, he's going to be gone for 3 months, and Shalom Yisrael. To which the Gemara says, Hava Obda, this happened. V'amru Rafram, Iruke Mistaya. And Rafram said, Halacha Lamaisa, the fact that he ran away, that is enough. Ultimately, again, and that's indeed how the Rambam paskins that halacha lamaisa nasa ubarach la'achar zman bav yashem ishto ein bekach klum. So I'll say, interesting enough, the way the Rambam paskins is that, whatever, we'll go get, let me read this to you just for a moment. So the Rambam says, avar v'nasa mu'uberes u'menika b'soch zman zeh, if you illegally married mu'uberes chavero or menekes chavero, right, within the 24 months, or within the 9 months. So what's the halacha? Yotzi beget. Halacha l'mais, you have to give her a get. If you're a Yisrael, you could remarry her after 24 months. By the way, I will say, I just want to point out, with the pregnancy case, if you marry a woman who is pregnant with someone else's child, so the L'mais, it's not just a pshat that you can go ahead and remarry her after the pregnancy, because remember, again, after pregnancy comes nursing. So remember, again, you would be only able to marry her really only after the 24 months of nursing. Nasa ubarach ula'achar zman ba v'yashav mishto. Right, if halach l'maisa he married her, and halach l'maisa ran away, and then came back only after the 2 years, ein bekach klum. The Rambam says that doesn't count, you'd have to give her a get. In other words, we're penalizing this guy. We want to be very careful with this situation, and we make him give her a get. You could remarry her the moment afterwards, but Lamaisa would require a get. Incredible. Says the Gemara. Let's go back there. Safek ben Teisha. So remember again, as you get to the end of the Mishnah said as follows. Safek ben Teisha, the Rishon, Safek ben Shiva la'achron. But say back to Yibum. Right? So Reuben passes away, leaves behind the widow Rachel. Turns out Rachel's pregnant. I'm sorry, one more piece. Shimon did Yibum. Turns out Rachel's pregnant. And I will say, what are we unsure of? We're unsure whose child it is. She gives birth. And we're unsure, is this a 9-month-old baby or 9-month pregnancy from husband number 1, or 7 from Reuven, or 7-month pregnancy from Yavam, from Shimon, husband number 2. Just simply unsure. So what? I'm sorry. So what does the Mishnah say? So the Mishnah says like this. The Mishnah says Yotzi, so they have to dissolve the marriage. Right? They have to dissolve the marriage. However, Vlad kosher, the baby is totally kosher. V'chayavin ba'asham taloi. But Rachel and Shimon have to bring in asham taloi. We'll say asham taloi is the carbon you bring if you possibly violated something significant. So that's the halacha. Amrli Rav Nachman. Lema halach acha rov nashim, the rov nashim letisha yaldan. Why don't we just say we go after the majority of women? And the majority of women deliver after 9 months. So just say that this is a 9-month-old baby. Amrle nashi didan l'shiva yaldan. Our women give birth at the end of 7 months. Amrle nashi didaichu hava ruba da'alma. So we'll say, Rav says back to Rav Nachman, are your women the majority of the world? Shkayach, your women give birth, at 7 months. But Lamaisa, we go after the rove of the world. The rove of the world is women give birth. I guess, right? The rove is that rove pregnancies are full-term pregnancies. We'll have to ask Dr. Leimbam is not here. He's in Eretz Yisrael, Baruch Hashem. So I'll have to ask him. It's an interesting idea. I don't know. Gemara seems to say majority of pregnancies are full-term pregnancies. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, if that's the case, rely on the rove. And therefore, let's assume that when Rachel gives birth, whose baby is she giving birth to? Whose baby? Reuven, her husband's. In which case, the baby born is Reuven's child. Still kosher, right? Totally kosher. But Lamaisa, obviously, you still have to dissolve the marriage. Now, instead of bringing Asham Talui, then you would what? You would bring a chatas. You bring a chatas because it turns out that Lamaisa, they definitely committed an illegal act. To which the Gemara says, Hachi Kami, this is what I mean to say. Rov Nashin Yaldan Latisha. The majority of women give birth at the end of 9 months. Umiyot l'shiva. A minority gives birth at the end of 7 months. Listen to this. V'chali yoledes tisha ubra nikar l'shlish yameh. We'll say women who carry full term, their pregnancy is visible at the end of the first trimester. Right? At the end of 3 months. V'zu, now in this case, obviously, hoyo v'lo hoker ubra l'shlish yameh Israeli ruba. But this woman, Rachel, was not showing at the end of 3 months. The fact that she was not showing at the end of 3 months, or else does what? Erodes the rove. And therefore, again, saying maybe for the rove of 9 months doesn't apply to her, and therefore opens the window of possibility that Lamaisa, this is a 7 month pregnancy for the second husband. 1 second. So I'll say, if that's true, that women who carry full term to 9 months, the pregnancy is visible at the end of the first trimester. Hamidalo hokar l'shlish yameh obra. Hamidalo hokar l'shlish yameh obra vaday bar shiva lebasrahu. If that's the case, then if Rachel wasn't showing at the end of 3 months, that shows that what? That shows that month. That what? This was a 7th month baby for Shimon. That should be a proof. To which the Gemara says, no. Elaima rov hayoldos letisha obra nikar l'shlish yameh. So no. What it means is the majority of women who carry full term, their pregnancy is visible at the end of 3 months. V'hai midelo hokar l'shlish yameh Israeli ruba. But this one, since she wasn't showing at the end of 3 months, ultimately, again, the rove was eroded. So we'll say, what we have over here is just like a lot of roves, right? Rove number 1 is the majority of women carry towards the end of full term, 9 months. Another rove is that ultimately, again, what? Halacha l'maisa, women who carry 9 months are generally showing at the end of 3 months. So I'll say the point over here is, but this woman, she didn't have either of those things, so the rove was eroded. But erosion of the rove does not create conclusive facts going in the other direction. So therefore, again, when Rachel gives birth, we're still not sure. Is this a 9-month-old baby, a 9-month pregnancy, right? For Reuven, husband number 1, or is this a 7-month pregnancy, husband number 2 for the Yavam, or for her brother-in-law, for Shimon? That's the fundamental shaila. So because we're unsure, again, the result is dissolve the marriage. Rachel and Shimon bring in Asham Talui, but the baby genealogically is 100% fit. Right? Rabbi, so because either way, halacha l'maisa, the baby's fine. Either the baby is the son of Reuven, in which case it's fine, or the baby is what? A 7-month-old baby of Shimon, right? But again, if it's a baby of Shimon, then it's not a baby of who? Reuven. And if Reuven didn't have a baby, then what? Yibam was a mitzvah. In either case, the baby is fine. That's why genealogically, that's why I'll say, interestingly enough, you have like a little bit of a suffix adultery, but Lamaisa, the baby is 1,000% genealogically fit. Now again, we're not necessarily sure who the father is, right? But Lamaisa, the baby is genealogically fit. Incredible. So I'll say, listen to this, to the point. This is incredible. Tan Rabbanan, Rishon Roy Lios Kohen Gadol. I'll say, listen to this, to the point. So I'll say, here's the case, right? Same case, right? Reuven passes away, leaves behind Rachel. Rachel goes ahead and does what she thought was Yibam with Shimon, gives birth. We're not sure. Baby, she gives birth. Is this a 7-month pregnancy for Shimon, 9-month pregnancy for Reuven? I will say that baby, let's say again, it's a family of Kohanim. So halacha l'maisa, that baby, when the baby is born, totally fit, to the point that it's a family of Kohanim, then what? That baby is eligible to be the Kohen Gadol. Incredible. We'll say, but watch this. Let's say, however, Shimon and Rachel remain married. They don't, right? The Mishnah says they have to get divorced. Let's say they remain married. That second child, V'sheni, mamzer misafek. See, Rabbi say that second baby, which definitely is whose baby? Whose baby? Rachel and Shimon, that's a safek mamzer. Why is it a safek mamzer? Because remember, again, halacha l'maisa, the marriage between Rachel and Shimon may be an illegal one. Because remember, again, that first baby may be Ruvain's baby. If it's Ruvain's baby, there's no din of Yibum. If there's no din of Yibum, the marriage between Rachel and Shimon is Eshes Ach, in which case any offspring would be a mamzer. Now again, not a full mamzer, it's a safek mamzer. They will say, right, what a mishpacha, right? You want to talk about like second child issues, right? Right, my older brother is fit to be a Kohen Gadol, right? And me, I'm a safek mamzer, right? I'm a safek mamzer. Well, so I'll just point out something very beautiful here. Not that we have time for it, but I'll just point out something very beautiful, which is this lashon of that the first baby is fit to be the Kohen Gadol. You know, so the Satmar Rav Zechusa Yagin Alinu says something so beautiful. He quotes the idea that Shulchan Aruch says that if a mother gives birth to a baby and she can't nurse, and she has to hire a wet nurse, right? This is before the days of synthetic formula, right? So she has to hire a wet nurse. So the Shulchan Aruch says, if possible, hire a Jewish woman to nurse your baby. A Jewish woman should be hired to nurse a Jewish baby, right? Why? Because ultimately we learn this from Moshe Rabbeinu. Because Moshe Rabbeinu, right, when Bas Paro took him in, she hired a nurse. Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't nurse from a non-Jewish woman. She wouldn't nurse from a non-Jewish woman. Right? And the Gemara says, why? Because the mouth that was going to talk with the Shechina should only nurse from a Jewish mother. Should only nurse from a Jewish mother. So Satmar Rav says, that's Shulchan Aruch says, that again, a woman has a baby, she can't nurse, try to hire a Jewish nurse. So Satmar Rav says, I don't understand. You're bringing a raya from Moshe Rabbeinu? You're bringing a raya from Moshe Rabbeinu? The Gemara says Moshe Rabbeinu didn't nurse from a non-Jewish because he was going to speak to the Shechina pa'al peh. Satmar Rav says, you see that you have to look at every single child as if they have the ability to be a Moshe Rabbeinu. There's no such things in Yiddishkeit as haves and haves not, right? There's no such things like someone's born, oh, you're destined for greatness, you're not destined for greatness. Everyone's destined for greatness. We actualize it in different ways. But Lamaisa, when the baby is born, we look at that baby and say, you could be a Moshe Rabbeinu, you could be a Sari Imenu, you could be a Kohen Gadol. And that is the most incredible way in which we instill great. If we remind our children that their greatness, that their potential is unlimited, then there's absolutely no telling what they could become. And it's not just hashkafa, this is institutionalized in halacha as well. Such an incredible yisod. In any event, Rabbi, so therefore, again, I will say, first child, ultimately, again, could be the Kohen Gadol. Second child, safek mamzer. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, ein mamzer misafek. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, there's no such thing as a mamzer misafek. So what does that mean? My Amar Rabbi, so there's going to be a lot of machlokes about this statement. So Amar Rabbi, Hachikar, what it means to say, Rishon Roilios Kohen Gadol. So we'll say, the first kid I understand, because the first kid is definitively kosher. The only shaila is what? Right, with the first baby, the only shaila is what? Right. Good. Who's your father? Right? Who's your father? Right? Who is your father? Right? Is it Reuven or is it Shimon? Right? That's the only shaila. Second child, again, Rabbi Eliezer says that it's a safek mamzer. So what does this mean about? Say Hakikamar. Rishon Elios Kohen Gadol v'sheni safek mamzer v'aser b'mamzeres. Rabbi say the second child, we still don't really know his status, right? We still don't know his status. Rabbi say now the second child is not a safek in paternity, but it is a safek in status. Is the relationship in the marriage between his parents a legal one or an illegal one? Because of that, again, he's a safek mamzer. What does it mean to be a safek mamzer, Rabbi say? Safek mamzer? Safek mamzer means you can't really marry anyone, right? You're stuck. He's not allowed to marry mamzer. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Eino safek mamzer, ela vadai mamzer, umuter mamzer. So Rabbi Eliezer argues, he says, no, this child is not a safek mamzer. This child is a vadai mamzer, and therefore halacha l'maisa, permitted to marry a mamzeres. So the Gemara says, Rava Amar Halkim, what does it mean to say? Rishon Ra'elios Kohen Gadol. We're just trying to figure out what Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is saying. First child, Rabbi say again, first child is fine. Can be even Kohen Gadol. V'sheni, mamzer vadai misafek. This is such a great line. What's the second child? He's a mamzer vadai misafek. Oh, okay. Rashi says, what does that mean? Kilomar, mitoch safek zeh naaseh kevadai mamzer. Because, so here's how I have to read it. Because of the suffix, We'll say, what's the suffix? What's the suffix? Are his parents legally married or not? Because of the suffix, the second child's status becomes one of a vadai mamzer, right? Because the suffix creates a situation of a vadai mamzer, and therefore again, umutter b'mamzeres, and therefore he's permitted to marry mamzeres. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, ein vadai mamzer misafek. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that does not make any sense. You cannot make a vadai mamzer from what? From a case, ultimately, again, of a suffix. In other words, we'll say, at most you have a suffix over here. What's the suffix? The suffix is, are Rachel and Shimon legally married or not? Is it Ishes Ach or is it a permitted marriage? So you can't make a definitive mamzer from a case of suffix Isser. Ella, suffix mamzer, va'aser b'mamzeres. Rather, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov will say, at most, child number 2 is a suffix mamzer. Rabbi will say, so on one hand, you say, well, I guess being a suffix mamzer is better than being an all-in mamzer, right? But Lamais is actually not, because at least I will say it's an incredible yesod also. You know, having doubtful identity is worse than having no identity. Right? So Lamais, at least when a person's a mamzer, they know who they are, they know what they are, they know who they can marry. Suffix mamzers, as they say, nishtahin nishtaher, right? There's nothing to do. I mean, there are people you can marry, but Lamais, again, he's stuck, he's in limbo. To which the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, Kamiflagi b'di Rabbi Elazar, and they're arguing over Elazar. This nan, Rabbi Elazar Omer, Vadon b'vadon mutter, Vadon b'sveikon, usveikon b'vadon, usveikon b'sveikon mutter. So Rabbi Elazar says like this: people who are genealogically blemished, and they're vadai genealogically blemished, they are permitted to marry each other. Ultimately, again, suffix genealogical blemishes are not permitted to marry each other. So we'll say, for example, a mamzer can marry a mamzer can marry a shifcha. Right? These people can marry. But we'll say, suffix mamzer cannot marry a suffix mamzer. Right? Why not? Why not? Because again, it might turn out that what? One of them is a mamzer, one of them is not a mamzer. So ultimately, ve'elu hein sfeikon. We'll say, what are the cases of suffix genealogy? Listen to this. Shtuki, asufi, vakusi. So we'll say, here are cases of suffix. Shtuki, we'll say it's actually shtuki. Rashi says, shekori ava ve'imo mushasko. Shtuki is a child when ultimately, again, the child starts calling out for his father, the mother silences him. Right, which is usually a way of saying she doesn't know who the father is or whatever else. That's a shtuki, right? Asufi is a child literally, again, who's abandoned by parents and taken in, literally collected, right? Asuf, by someone else. These are all people who don't know their true paternity. The kusi, I will say kusi again. We've always had the kusi. Rashi says in makbila kidushe kesav v'shtar the less like zer shava. So listen to this. I will say. So interestingly enough, kusim were not makbid on kiddushin. So as I say, what ended up happening by the kusim is that halacha l'maisa, because they were not careful with the laws of kiddushin, it created a lot of mamzer situations. Okay, or I should say, suffix mamzer situations. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav halacha kerbelazar. The halacha follows Rabbi Elazar. Kiamri Tzchini Shmuel Amarle Hillel Shana Asar Yuchsin Alumi Bavel. Hillel said, I will say, there were 10. Listen to this. There were 10 genealogical categories who came up from Bavel. Listen to this. Who were they? Kohani Leviye Yisraeli. There you have Kohanim Leviim Yisraelim. Chalali. I will say Chalalim. Remember again, what are Chalalim? Chalalim are the offspring of illegal Kohanic marriages. Not illicit marriages, but illegal marriages. Gerei, right, are ultimately, again, Gerim, right, converse. Charurei, emancipated slaves. Mamzeri, Nesine. We'll say, remember again, the Nesinim were the nation that Yoshua ben Nun made a treaty with. He thought they were from out of Canaan. They tricked him. They're really from within Canaan. They were accepted. Shtuki, Asufi. The Kulan Mutarin Lavo Zebozeh. And ultimately, again, all of them are permitted to intermarry one into the other. And Abu Rashi points out, no way. What it means is, actually, interestingly enough, each category is permitted to marry with the one directly under it. That's the way it works. And sometimes, again, with two under it. Like Kohanim could marry, right, Leviim, Yisraelim, but not Chalalim. But Leviim, Yisraelim can marry Chalalim. So that's how that works. So the Gemara says, Va'at Amrit Halacha Rabbi Elazar, and you're saying that Halacha of Rabbi Elazar doesn't make any sense. To which the Gemara says, Abai Sarvala Kishmol Damar Halacha Ki Hillel. Umuki la Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov aliba de hilchasa ki hechi de lo tikshi hilchasa hilchasa. So Abai held like Shmuel, who said the halacha follows Hillel, and ultimately Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov established this according to the halacha in order that we not have contradictory halachas. Rava Savar lo Kirav, Damar lo Rabbi Eliezer. Rava holds like Rava holds like the halacha follows Rabbi Eliezer. Umuki la Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov aliba de hilchasa. So ultimately, Rava also held like Rav, but ultimately, again, he said the halacha falls like Rabbi Lazar and established it like Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov in order that the halachos not contradict each other. Amar Abaye will say, Amar Beis, Amar Abaye, Mina Minallah. From where do I know this? Right, Mina Minallah. The Chol Sveika Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Kivadai Mashrile. They both say in general, how do I know that according to Rabbi Eliezer, we kind of treat like Safek Mamzeros or Safek in general like a Vadai, to which the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Harish Shabbat Anoshim Harbe, Ve'enu Yodea al Eza Mehenba. What's an example? A man has relations with multiple women. And let's say again, included in that category are some women, or included in that group are some women who are prohibited to him. But he doesn't know whom he had relations with or whom he didn't. Or you have a woman who had relations with multiple men, right? Some of them being asura to her, and she's pregnant, and she does not know whom she is pregnant from. So we'll say, what's the problem? What's the problem? We'll say, see, now what happens? We have cases of Safek Mamzerus over here, right? Because halacha l'maisa, let's say within that category we're siblings, right? We're within it. So the man doesn't know, did he have relations with his sister? Now they have relations with his sister. The woman doesn't know who she's pregnant from. So we'll say, so again, this is obviously an extreme case. You're going to see why we're pointing this out over here, is because you could have a situation where brothers end up marrying sisters, because people aren't keeping proper track of offspring, and the world becomes filled with mamzerim. Now I will say, why are we bringing up this case? Because to highlight the idea that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that a Safek mamzer is a mamzer. A Safek mamzer is a mamzer, right? Because remember, again, in this case, you have Safek, but yet, again, we're still calling that mamzerus. V'al zenemar umala haaretz zima. And about this, the pasuk says, ultimately, again, the world will be filled with immorality. Look at Rashi, second line from the top. V'nismali kala olam kulo mamzerim, misafek karlu mamzerim. So Rabbi say, this is the definitive position of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. He holds that a Safek mamzer is still called a mamzer. And Rabbi say, this is the point of contention in this particular sugya. Rabbi say, just to remind you, by the way, how did we get here? We got here because a very important point for our purposes, for Yibum purposes, which is that halacha l'maisa, in this case, where Rachel did Yibum with Shimon, it turns out that she's pregnant, right? Remember again, she gives birth. What's our suffix? Is this a 9-month baby for Ruvain, or is this a 7-month baby for Shimon? So we'll say, now again, she gives birth. What's the halacha by that case? Step one, they have to divorce. Right? Step 2, they both have to bring an Asham Talui. Step 3, status of the child, 100% kosher. To the point the Gemara said, if it's a family of Kohanim, he's even eligible to be the Kohen Gadol. However, if Rachel and Shimon remain together and build their family, now we're in problematic territory. Because that second child, again, I both say now is what? Safek Mamzer. Now again, remember, why Safek Mamzer? Because it's possible that the marriage between Rachel and Shimon is the biblical erva of Eshes Ach. So therefore, again, you have Safek Mamzeris. Rabbi will say, who is the opinion who hold that there's a concept? So again, the general machlokes, again, we just don't have time to do it justice, but the general machlokes is, do we say that Mamzeris is only a definitive status, or is there such a concept of Safek Mamzeris as well? That's the machlokes. All the Gemara is showing over here is that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is the opinion who holds that there is a concept of Safek Mamzerus. Good. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, good. Rava will say, Haki Kamar. Rava will say, Rava is just arguing on the pasuk. He's not arguing on the halacha. What does it mean? Amala Aretz Zima. Rava will say, what does Zima mean? What is Zima? Right? So Zima, we translate as immorality. Rava says, no, Haki Kamar, Zu Mahi. Zima is actually a contraction of 3 words. Zu Mahi. What is this? Bolstering the idea, if you look at Rashi, Lashon Safek, right? So the word Zima itself includes not only definitive acts of immorality, but even Safek acts of immorality. Yes, Rakin Amar Elazar and Yaakov, Lo Yisa Adam, listen to this, we'll say it's pretty wild. Lo Yisa Adam Isha b'Medina Zu, V'yelech v'Yisa Isha b'Medina Acheres. A man should not marry one woman in one country and another woman in another country. We'll say, by the way, this is good advice, right? This is good, solid advice. Right? So don't have two families in two countries. Why not? Shema yizdavenu zelazeh v'nimtza'ach no se'asachoso. They're both say it's interesting. Remember, what's the problem with this? The problem with this is if one family doesn't know about the other family, it turns out that what? That halacha l'maisa, you could have siblings ending up marrying one another. That's the problem over here. So therefore I will say, the Gemara says, Ini, is that so? Is that so? Vaha rav ki ikla ledarshir, ledardoshir, machriz va'amar man havle yoma. Yet Rabbi say, when Rav would go to their dashir, he would go and he would announce, who wants to be my wife for the day? So we'll say, so now here's what's interesting about this. We're going to explain what this is in just a moment. But he's going to different locales, right? Whenever he would travel, go to Dardashir, he would say, I'm looking to get married for the day. Rav Nachman ki ikol shchinsiv, machriz va'amar, man havil yoma. And I will say they had their families back home, but now they're traveling. They're making this announcement, who wants to go ahead and be my wife for the time that I'm in this place? To which the Gemara says, Shani Rabbanan de Paki Shamayu. That's not a problem. Why? Because we'll say, what are we concerned about? In other words, remember again, this is polygamy is permitted. So what's the problem if they want to have wives in different places? So again, the problem is we're concerned about siblings marrying each other. So apparently, again, in these cases of these famous Rabbanim, that wasn't an issue. Why? Because everyone knew who they were. So when there's fame, when people are known, then halacha l'maisa, again, there's no concern. There's no concern about ultimately, again, brothers marrying sisters. I have Amarava. Rava says, say, now we're a little bit intrigued by this practice over here, right? You go on a trip, right? They went on a business trip. Who wants to be my wife for the time that I'm here on the business trip? So Rava say, so practically, how does it even work? After Amarava, Tavoli Nasev in Espaisa, Tzricha Leishev Shivnikim. Rava say there's an interesting halach in Hilchos Nida, which is that when a man asks a woman to marry him, halacha l'maisa, there's something called dam chimud. Dam chimud means an emission of blood that comes from like a surge of a feeling of love. So it's an interesting halacha, and we saw this in Maseches Nida. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, whenever a man proposes to a woman, halacha l'maisa, she automatically has to assume that she has become a nida. So if they're rolling into town, right, they say, who wants to be my wife for the time that I'm here? It doesn't even work, because even if a woman says yes, she has to assume that she became a nida, and there's a requirement to go ahead and observe 7 days. Shivnikiyim. To which the Gemara says, Rabbanon, shluchaihu hava mishteri umodilahu. No. They would send the guy ahead, right? In other words, they wouldn't wait to get to town to make the marriage proposal, but rather, again, they would go ahead and send a shaliach ahead of time to identify the right woman. V'bai sema. I will say, listen to this, but here's really what it comes to. V'bai sema. Rabbanon yechudi ba'almahu demiyachtilahu. I will say, in reality, we'll say, why were these Rabbanim doing this? In other words, let's be honest. This sounds a little bit strange, right? Rav is going to Dardosher, who wants to be my wife. Rav Nachman is going to Shchinsiv, who wants to be my wife. What's going on over here? I will say, in reality, this is actually something absolutely amazing. They were away from their wives, and they were concerned that when being away from their wives, what would happen? Temptation sets in. The goal over here wasn't to have a woman to have relations with. The goal over here was to have what we call pas besalo, bread in the basket. Rashi says over here, the Gemara says, their intention wasn't to live with these women. Their intention ultimately, again, was liyachude. Ultimately, again, to have the ability to have relations. The Amar Mar, Eina dome mi sheyesh lo pas besalo, lemi she'ein lo pas besalo. Ultimately, again, you can't compare someone who has bread in their basket to someone who doesn't have bread in their basket. Well, so in other words, we've seen this yesod, which is actually quite amazing and profound, which is that halacha l'maisa, again, the idea that we see this, we saw this by the Ishiti by Yom Kippur, right? But what happened by the Ishiti by Yom Kippur? They set up booths, and by each booth, they had water and food for the person. Sometimes knowing that you have access to something gives you the restraint to say, I don't need it. So I will say the knowledge that they had a permissible way to live with a woman ultimately, again, was enough to keep their desires in check, which I will say is such a profound use. So we'll have to stop with this. But I just want to point out something absolutely amazing. And I will say it is so important to be honest with ourselves about who we are and what we are, and to recognize that no one's above temptation. Right? We go ahead and we see this, oh, Rav Nachman, what's going on over here? I will say, when a man is away from his wife, temptation sets in. And it is arrogant to think that any one of us is above it, right? Just Rav and Rav Nachman were honest about it. So Rav and Rav Nachman kind of, okay, I don't know that any was obligated to go to these measures, right? But Lamaisa, what an overwhelming Gemara, right? And what an affirming Gemara, that halacha Lamaisa, again, everyone has temptations. Like Chazal told us, the two things that every single person has desire for is immorality and theft and money. Those are the two things, shared temptations. Ultimately, again, Rav and Rav Nachman are saying you have to be proactive in ensuring that your temptations do not derail you. I'm not advising, I don't think this is the right approach for us, right? But lemaisa, a person does have to devise the proper mechanisms that we fulfill loli de nisayon veloli de visayon, to actively take steps to ensure that we do not fall prey to our temptations. We'll have to stop over here. We'll pick up, if we're not finished with this, so we'll pick up with this tomorrow. Shkayach. Hey.